Welcome to Zen Mind Journey, a place beyond noise, beyond rush, beyond the tangled thoughts that often follow us to bed. Tonight we step into something slower, softer, wider. So take a moment now to let yourself arrive. Gently close your eyes and feel the surface beneath you. Let your body grow heavy. Let the breath come easily, like waves touching the shore. The day may have left its footprints, but you don't have to carry them into the night. You've done enough. You are enough. Let go of the lists, the deadlines, the questions that have no answers tonight. Right now, there is only this moment. And this story. The tale you're about to hear is not a tale in the usual sense. There are no twists, no loud surprises, no need to pay attention to every word. It's more like a path that appears as you walk it. A temple you find when you stop searching. A voice that speaks when everything else has quieted. Each word, each pause, each breath between lines has been placed with care, not to stimulate the mind, but to soothe it. You may feel your thoughts begin to wander. That's okay. Let them. Like leaves floating down a gentle stream. There is nowhere to be except here, and nothing to do but listen as the music begins and the story unfolds. May your body soften, your mind slow, and your spirit find peace in the spaces between the words. Let the journey begin.
In a small garden behind a weathered house, there hung a wind chime made of 5 hollow bells. It was old, brass mostly, threaded with fading silk cords that swayed when the wind remembered them. Most days it was silent, still, asleep in the stillness of the air. But when the wind passed through, a soft breath, a sudden sigh, the bells would sing as though they'd been waiting to speak all along. A gentle, broken music, like water remembering how to fall. The woman who lived there was quiet too. She tended the moss with slow hands. She swept the stones without hurrying. And every morning before tea she would touch the wind chime gently and say, "Still here." That was all. Just that. As if reminding it and herself that presence did not always require motion. One day, as the woman sipped her tea, a small sparrow landed on the stone railing beside the wind chime. It tilted its head, hopped closer, then again, until it was perched on the thin wooden rod beneath the center bell. The wind did not stir, the chime did not ring, but the bird stayed. For minutes, for hours, watching the garden, watching the stillness, as if waiting for a kind of music that could not be heard with ears. The sparrow came again the next day, and the day after that, always at the same hour, just after the woman's tea had cooled enough to sip in silence. She began to expect it, not with excitement, but with the calm welcome of a leaf greeting rain. The bird never chirped, never flapped, just landed softly and sat. Sometimes on the railing, sometimes on the chime's base, once even atop the center bell. It never made a sound, and neither did the wind, but the woman smiled. There was something in their quiet companionship that felt whole. Some afternoon she would sit beside the wind chime and the bird together, eyes closed, hands still. She didn't speak. She didn't need to, because in the hush between them there was a kind of conversation that only still things can share. One morning she left a few grains of millet on the stone ledge. The bird looked at them, but did not eat. It simply tilted its head again, watching her with one black eye, as if the offering had already been received the moment it was given. The wind remained still, the chimes untouched, and yet each day felt fuller than the one before. Not louder, not brighter, just deeper. The kind of depth that doesn't call attention to itself. Like the quiet in a teacup after the last sip. On the seventh day, the wind returned. It came gently, like an old friend stepping softly into a room it once knew well. The leaves stirred, the tea steam leaned, and the wind chimes swayed, just slightly. The sparrow was already there, perched as always, still as a thought not yet spoken. And then a single bell rang, software clear, lonely in the most beautiful way. The sparrow didn't fly. It remained still, eyes closed as if listening to something only the wind could sing. Then another bell. Then two together, a low harmony, unrehearsed, unfinished, perfect. The woman stood by the door, watching, hands folded, eyes soft. She did not cry, but something inside her did. Not sadness, not joy, something older than both. The sparrow tilted its head again, once, slowly, and took flight. Not fast, not far, just high enough to catch the breeze and ride it through the open air like a note returning to its source. The bells rang once more, all five this time, not loud, not long, just enough. Then silence, but not the old kind, not the kind that waits. This silence was full, like a bowl once filled, now emptied with grace. The woman bowed to the chime, then to the sky, then to the small space where the bird had always sat. She whispered, "Thank you for waiting." The sparrow did not return the next day, nor the one after that. The railing remained bare, the chime hung still, the wind had moved on. And yet the garden felt unchanged, no less alive, no less quiet. In fact, the quiet now carried a sound the woman had never heard before, not in her ears, but in her chest, in her breath, a kind of music left behind like footprints in morning dew. She still placed millet on the stone ledge. Though it remained untouched, she still whispered, "Still here," each morning to the chime, her voice softer now, less out of habit, more out of reverence. One evening she sat in the garden as the sky turned to ink and stars began to poke through the dusk like lanterns. The wind chime moved, barely, a hush of metal on metal. No bird, no gust, just memory. And that too was enough. The woman closed her eyes, listened, and smiled, because she understood now that the bird had never needed to sing to be heard, and the wind had never needed to blow to be felt. Some things, the truest things, leave behind no mark, but they remain in stillness, in silence, in the spaces we once shared. And so the chime stayed. The wind returned when it wished. And sometimes, on quiet mornings, if you listened just right, you could hear the memory of feathers brushing softly against the rim of a bell, reminding you that not all goodbyes are departures. Some are simply echoes that choose to stay.
And now, for the next story.
There was once a boy who lived at the very edge of a village, where the grass grew wild and the forest whispered secrets only the wind could carry. He was not like the other children. While they chased birds and built games from sticks and stones, he chased something else. Shadows. He would rise before dawn and wait for the first stretch of light to spill over the hills. And when it did, he would watch the shadows fall, long and strange, across the earth. Then he would run, chasing them, following them, trying to step where they stepped, trying to catch what could not be held. The villagers watched. Some laughed, others shook their heads, but the boy didn't mind. To him, the shadows seemed alive, as if they were leading him somewhere he had not yet understood. Sometimes they danced behind trees, other times they vanished altogether, but always they returned. And so did he, each day, each morning, chasing the dark that danced inside the light. One morning, while following a long shadow cast by a pine tree, he stumbled upon an old man sitting by a stream. The man didn't move, didn't speak, only Saturday, still as a stone, face turned to the sun. The boy paused, watched, then asked, "Are you waiting for the shadows too?" The old man opened his eyes, smiled faintly, and said nothing, just patted the earth beside him. The boy hesitated. He had never followed a shadow to a person before, let alone one who said nothing. Still, something about the old man's silence felt more welcoming than most people's words. So he sat, not for long, just a moment, just enough. The stream bubbled softly beside them, birds shifted in the branches above, and the shadow of the pine tree moved slowly across the forest floor. The boy watched it stretch, then shrink, then vanish. He frowned. "Where did it go?" he whispered. The old man looked toward the sky. "It didn't go anywhere," he said gently. "It became something else." The boy didn't understand, but he stayed, and the old man said nothing more. Instead, he handed the boy a small flat stone, smooth and warm from the sun. "What's this for?" "To sit on, but I'm already sitting." The old man smiled, "Not the way you will." That night, the boy returned home without chasing a single shadow. He placed the stone on the floor beside his bed, and for the first time, he wondered what it would be like to stop moving. Not because he was tired, but because maybe there was something to see by staying still. The next morning, the boy didn't run. He walked, quietly, slowly, holding the stone in his hand like a secret. He returned to the stream. The old man was there again, knees folded, face turned to the rising light. This time, the boy didn't speak. He simply sat, placed the stone beneath him, and listened. For a while, nothing happened. The forest rustled. A dragonfly passed. Then the old man spoke. "You've followed shadows, but have you ever asked what they are?" The boy thought for a moment. "They're shapes made by light." "Yes," the man nodded, "but they're also the places where light cannot go." The boy turned his head slowly, watching his own shadow on the mossy ground. It looked like him, but not. He reached for it. His fingers passed through nothing. The man continued, "Shadows are not lies. They're reminders." Reminders of what? Of what stands in the way. The boy looked at the trees, each one casting long, cool silhouettes across the forest floor. "So when I chase them, I'm chasing what blocks the light." The old man smiled. "Perhaps, or perhaps you're learning how to walk alongside it." A silence fell again, but this one felt deeper, fuller, like the space between notes in a song. The boy closed his eyes, listened to the breeze, felt the sunlight on his face, and the cool shadow on his back. For the first time, he didn't need to chase. He simply stayed. Years passed. The boy, now a young man, still walked to the stream, still carried the stone, still sat beside the old man when he was there. But more often now, he came alone. Not to chase, not to search, just to sit. The shadows still moved, as they always had, stretching, shifting, curling beneath trees and across water. But he no longer followed them. He watched. He breathed. He listened. One morning, as he sat in stillness, a group of children passed by. They laughed, ran, leapt through puddles of shadow as he once had. One of them paused, watching him curiously. "What are you looking at?" the child asked. The young man smiled. "Nothing," he said, "and everything." The child frowned, ran to catch the others. The young man looked down at the stone in his hand, worn now, smoothed by time and patience. He placed it gently beside the stream, then stood. The sun was rising, his shadow stretched before him, long and light and quietly familiar. He didn't chase it, but he followed it, not with urgency, but with trust, because he understood now. Shadows weren't destinations, they were companions, reminders, reflections, and most of all, invitations to return to the light that cast them. That evening, as the forest darkened and the last birds quieted, he sat once more beneath the trees. No shadows remained, only darkness, only stillness, and within that stillness, he found something else. Not light, not shadow, but the space where both could meet.
And now, for the next story.
It began on a morning draped in grey. The sky was low, heavy with clouds, and the rain fell not in sheets, but in a soft, endless hush, like the sound of someone breathing in their sleep. A young woman stood at the edge of a mountain trail, her cloak soaked, her boots thick with mud. She had set out days ago following a map drawn in ink and given to her by someone long gone. It had led her well, until now. Now the path was gone, wiped clean by the rain, no markings, no signs, just glistening stone and the rustle of wet leaves. She stood in the drizzle, confused, frustrated, and very tired. The mountains were quiet, no birds, no wind, only water, and something else. Something softer, a silence that seemed to watch her. She looked down at her feet, mud and moss. No trail. She looked ahead. Mist. Then she looked inward and took a breath. Not a deep one, just enough. Then, without the map, without the markers, she stepped forward. One step, then another, each footfall soft, unsure, and yet true. The path she had known was gone, but something new was beginning to form beneath the rain. The rain followed her, not angrily, not fiercely, but patiently, like an old friend with nothing left to prove. She walked, past trees that leaned as if listening, past stones slick with memory. Hours passed, or maybe just minutes. Time was different in the rain. Eventually, she came upon a small house barely visible through the mist. A wooden gate, painted red long ago, stood slightly open, and behind it an old man knelt in the mud, tending to a single yellow flower. He looked up as she approached, but said nothing. She stood at the gate, rain dripping from her sleeves, and asked, "Is this the path to the monastery?" The man shook his head, then nodded, then shrugged. "Yes," he said finally, "and no. It depends on what you call the path." She frowned. "I mean the one drawn on the map." He smiled. "Ah, that one. It washed away last spring. The mountain took it back." The woman looked down, felt the ache in her legs, the damp in her bones. "Then I've gone the wrong way." "Not necessarily," the man said, patting the earth beside the flower. "Sometimes the right path is the one that appears only when you stop looking for it." She said nothing, only watched the flower, its petals wet, its colour somehow brighter in the rain. The man stood slowly, his knees cracking. "You can rest here," he said, "or keep walking. Either way, you'll arrive somewhere." She looked back the way she had come, then forward, then stepped through the gate and sat. She stayed with the gardener for 2 days. They spoke little, shared warm rice, boiled tea over a small fire. The rain never stopped. Not once, but it softened, turned gentle, like a lullaby poured from clouds. On the third morning she rose early. The garden glistened, mist curled between branches, and in the damp earth, tiny green shoots reached up like shy questions. She stood at the gate, uncertain. The gardener came beside her. "You'll go today," he said, not as a question, but a noticing. She nodded. "But I still don't know the way." He bent down, brushed his hand across the mossy ground, and revealed a faint trail carved not by tools, but by time. "Paths appear when feet return," he said, "even when maps do not." She stared. It was there, just barely, a crease in the forest floor, worn smooth by travellers who never left marks. "It won't be straight," the man added, "and it won't look like a path from above." She smiled. "Nothing does." "In the rain." With a small bow, she thanked him, then stepped onto the trail with quiet feet and an open heart. And as she walked, the rain did not hinder her. It held her, wrapped her in silence. And somehow, each time she lost the trail, a new one appeared. Not ahead, but beneath her, as if the mountain itself was guiding her one step at a time, not by certainty, but by presence. By dusk, the trail faded again. The forest grew thicker. The rain returned, heavier now, but still soft, still kind. She stopped beneath an overhang of rock and moss, waited, listened, let the rain speak. She no longer wondered where she was. There was no map, no destination, only the sound of drops meeting stone and the slow, steady rhythm of her breath. Then, through the trees, a light, faint, warm, steady. She followed it, not quickly, not urgently, as if drawn by something older than direction. And there, in a hollow of the mountain, was a wooden temple, unmarked, unmapped, but undeniably meant. Its lanterns flickered with welcome. No gate, no name, just a space waiting to be entered. Inside, a single monk sat cross-legged by a fire. He looked up, smiled, and said, "You found it." She lowered her hood. Steam rose from her shoulders. "I wasn't looking anymore." He nodded. "That's why you arrived." She stepped inside, removed her boots, knelt. The monk poured tea into a simple clay cup. "This place isn't on any map," he said, "because it isn't a place. It's a moment." She sipped. The warmth spread through her hands, her chest, her quiet. And outside, the rain fell like a blessing, no longer washing things away, but revealing what had always been waiting beneath the noise.
And now, for the next story.
At the edge of a quiet village where the cherry blossoms fell like soft pink snow, stood a small wooden house with a paper door and a crooked roof. Inside, an old man sat at a low table facing the morning light. He was a calligrapher, or rather he had been. The villagers still brought him brushes, paper, even ink, but he no longer wrote. He simply sat, hands folded, table bare. There were no scrolls, no characters, no poetry pinned to the walls. Only a single brush laid gently across a stone tray. No ink, no water, just the brush. Each morning the old man would dip it in air and move it across invisible paper as if painting something no one else could see. To some, he seemed lost, to others, mad. But he smiled often, slept deeply, and when he walked through the village, children would bow without knowing why, One boy, curious and quiet, began to watch from a distance. Day after day, he crept closer to the little house, until one morning he sat just outside the paper door and asked, "What are you painting, if there is no ink?" The old man didn't answer, not at first. He simply looked up, eyes soft and shining, and said, "Would you like to learn?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. And from that day forward, the lessons began. The next morning, the boy returned. The old man placed a second brush on the tray, also dry, also waiting. The boy picked it up, confused. "There's still no ink," he said. The calligrapher nodded. "Good, then you're ready to begin." And so they did. Each day they sat side by side, moving their brushes through the air over the empty table in perfect silence. The boy was unsure at first, his strokes wild, too fast, too unsure. But the old man never corrected him, only whispered, "Slower, feel the breath in your hand. Let the brush follow your heart." Weeks passed, then months. The boy still saw no characters, no ink, no proof. But something inside him began to change. His breathing slowed, his hands steadied, his thoughts softened. Sometimes as they painted in the invisible, the wind would stir, a bird would cry, a leaf would land on the table, silent punctuation to a sentence no one could read. And still, they continued. One evening, after many silent mornings, the boy asked, "What are we writing?" The old man smiled. "Nothing." Then, he added, "and everything." One morning, as the clouds hung low over the village, the boy arrived to find a fresh pot of ink on the tray. He stared, thick, dark, real. The old man said nothing, only nodded toward it. "Today," he said softly, "you may use it, if you choose." The boy hesitated. He had forgotten what ink felt like, how it clung to the brush, how it whispered permanence with every stroke. His hand trembled. He dipped the brush. The black glistened like night water, and he began to paint. For the first time in months, his lines left a trail, elegant curves, bold sweeps. But something felt different. He noticed his breath quicken, his thoughts sharpen, a quiet pressure behind each stroke, as if the ink demanded perfection. Halfway through, he stopped, put the brush down, and said, almost ashamed, "I liked it better when it disappeared." The old man nodded. "Ink is heavy," he said. "It carries the eye's expectation, but the invisible, that belongs to the soul." The boy stared at the page. It was beautiful, but it didn't feel like his. He picked up the dry brush again, moved it gently across the same page with no ink, and smiled. There was no mark, but he could feel every stroke, every pause, every intention. The real art, he realized, was not in the seeing, but in the being. Seasons passed, the cherry trees bloomed and fell, the boy grew taller, straight, quieter. The old man grew slower. His brush moved less, but when it did, the air seemed to pause. One morning, the boy arrived to find the paper door open, the brush tray empty, and the old man seated, facing the sun. His eyes were closed, his hands folded gently in his lap. No brush, no movement, only stillness. The boy sat beside him, waited, breathed, and after some time he picked up the old man's brush from the shelf. Still dry, still weightless. He held it above the table, and without a word, began to move. Soft strokes, air-bound arcs, pauses where the heart had once spoken. No one watched. No one needed to, because the room itself remembered. The old man opened his eyes just once more and whispered, "Now you see," then closed them again, peacefully. In the years that followed, the boy remained in the little house. He taught no lessons, hung no scrolls. But each morning, as the light crept across the floor, he painted with a brush without ink, and others began to come. Some curious, some tired, some carrying empty pages in their hearts. They sat, watched, and sometimes joined him. No words, no instructions, just the quiet rhythm of brushes moving through air. And in time, they too learned to feel what could not be seen. Not everyone understood. But those who stayed left with something deeper than art. They carried silence, stillness, presence, the memory of a brush and the echo of nothing that somehow meant everything.
And now, for the next story.
Along a narrow forest path hidden by roots and quiet moss, there sat a rock. It wasn't large, nor polished. It didn't mark anything. It didn't move. It simply rested half buried in soil as the wind passed over it, again and again. Travelers rarely noticed. Those who did never looked twice. And yet, the rock was not always the same. Each spring, as the snow melted, new droplets would carve tiny veins across its surface. In summer, sunlight warmed its face until small lichens bloomed like ancient script etched in green. Autumn brought leaves that nestled against it. Some stayed, slowly melting into the soil. And winter wrapped it in stillness so complete, even time itself seemed to pause beside it. The rock never spoke, never stirred, but it turned, not quickly, not even once a year, just a slow, imperceptible shift, so faint it could not be seen, only sensed, like a breath between moments. Some said it was the wind, others blamed the rain or the roots that grew underneath. But the truth was simpler. The rock listened to the seasons, to the footsteps, to the silence between bird calls. And with each turning, it learned something, not in words, but in wait, in patience, in how to remain and still be moved. There was a small monastery nearby, stone walls, sloped roofs, wind chimes that sang only when the mountain breeze remembered them. A young monk lived there, quiet, curious, still learning the rhythm of walking without hurry. Each morning, after sweeping the temple steps, he would walk the path that curved through the forest. He never had a destination, only a direction. And one day he saw the rock. He paused, not because it looked important, but because it looked still, perfectly still. He sat across from it, cross-legged, hands folded, and simply watched. The rock did nothing, said nothing, but something about its silence made the monk want to stay. So he did. Every morning, every season, he sat. And as the years unfolded like petals, the monk noticed things. The way moss crept along the base, the way frost melted first on one side, the way the rock seemed to shift just slightly toward the east. He never touched it, never tried to move it. He simply returned again and again, until the path itself knew his footsteps and the birds stopped flying away when he approached. Sometimes he would whisper to the stone, "Still here," and though the rock never replied, the monk always left feeling heard. It became his ritual, more sacred than prayer, a silence more eloquent than any scripture. Years passed. The monk's hair turned silver, his steps slower, but still, each morning, he walked the path. He no longer swept the temple steps. Others did that now. But the rock, that was still his, or rather, he was still its. One autumn morning, he arrived later than usual. His breath came in soft clouds. His knees creaked as he lowered himself to sit. The rock, of course, was waiting. But something had changed. A line, once hidden along the base, was now clearly visible. A crack. No, a marking. A natural fold now turned just enough to catch the light. He hadn't noticed it before, but now it felt deliberate, as if the rock had finally revealed something it had been keeping for decades. The monk smiled, not with his mouth, but with his whole body. He whispered, "You've turned," and the forest, just for a breath, felt warmer. He placed his palm flat on the earth next to the rock, not touching, just close, then closed his eyes. And for a moment, the space between them, man and stone, was so still, even the wind held its breath, because this, he understood now, was the way things speak when they are truly listening. Not in words, not in signs, but in presence, in slow change, in the trust that comes from staying. That day he sat longer than usual, not because he had to, but because he didn't want to leave. That winter was long, the snow deep, the wind often too strong for walking. The monk visited less, but he never forgot. He sat by the temple window, facing the forest, eyes closed, heart listening. And when spring returned, soft and pale, he made the journey one last time. The path was overgrown, moss thick, branches lower than before. But the rock was there, turned just slightly more, its shape unfamiliar in a familiar way, like meeting an old friend with a new smile. The monk sat, though his knees ached, though his hands trembled. He brought with him a small wooden tag etched with a single word: listen. He placed it gently beside the rock, tucked beneath a fern where wind and time could do what they pleased. Then he bowed deep and long and turned to go. He did not look back, but the forest did. It watched his slow steps until they disappeared between the trunks. Then all was still again, and the rock, which had turned through decades without witness, now waited once more. until one summer a child wandered along the path. He stopped, looked, saw the stone, and something beneath the fern. A word, faded but clear. Listen. He knelt, didn't touch, just sat. And in that moment, the rock moved. Not far, not fast, just enough to begin again.
And now, for the next story.
In a narrow lane where the morning fog lingered longest, there stood a shop with no sign, no display, and a bell above the door that had long since forgotten how to ring. The shop was plain, a single window, a crooked step, and always a faint scent of leather and cedar. Inside, before the sun ever touched the rooftops, a man worked in silence. The shoemaker. He was not young, but not yet old. His hands were worn, not with age, but with repetition. He moved slowly, deliberately. Each motion measured like a monk sweeping sand in circles. He didn't rush, didn't pause. Thread through leather, tap of the mallet, soft hiss of the awl. No music, no lantern, only the grey hush of the hour before dawn. This was when he felt most himself. Not because the world was quiet, but because he was. The village rarely saw him. Shoes simply appeared, fixed, polished, left outside doorsteps with no note but a crease of care. He charged no coin. He asked no thanks. His payment was the rhythm itself, the peace that came with each stitch and every soft sigh of fabric pulled tight. Sometimes as he worked, he would whisper something to the shoes. Be kind to the feet that wear you. And then return to the next pair with the same patience and quiet grace. One morning, a child wandered past the shop. She was small, curious, dragging one boot with a broken sole that left a soft flap in her wake. She paused at the crooked step, peered through the dusty glass, and saw the shoemaker sitting quietly at his bench. He didn't look up, but he spoke. You can come in if you like. She stepped carefully inside. The door creaked like an old song. The air smelled of wax and weathered wood. He pointed to a stool near the window. She sat, swinging her legs, watching. The shoemaker continued his work, needle and thread tight and precise. Finally, he looked at her boot. May I? She nodded, eyes wide. He took the boot as if it was something delicate, not broken, just waiting. He worked without speaking, and when he finished, he placed it gently at her feet and said, Try again. She did. No flap, no drag. She grinned, a wide, wordless kind of thanks, and ran out the door without saying a thing. The shoemaker smiled. Just once, just barely. From that day on, the door was never fully shut. People began to leave their shoes on the step, not with names, not with notes, just placed with trust. And somehow they returned, stitched, softened, restored. No one saw him do it. No one knew when. But the shoes always came back better than before, and always, quietly. One rainy evening, just as the light was folding itself into the mist, a figure appeared at the door. No shoes, no umbrella, just silence and soaked sleeves. The shoemaker looked up. The man said nothing, only stepped inside, leaving faint, wet prints on the wooden floor. He carried no bag, offered no request, just sat on the same stool the child had once used. The shoemaker studied him without staring, then asked, "Have you lost something?" The man looked down at his bare feet, cracked, calloused, still trembling slightly from the cold. He nodded, but not with shame, with acceptance. The shoemaker didn't ask more. He turned, opened a low drawer and pulled out a pair of worn sandals, old but intact. He knelt quietly and placed them at the man's feet. "These aren't new," he said, "but they remember how to walk." The man bowed, not out of gratitude, but as if receiving something sacred. And when he stood, he left nothing behind. No coin, no words. Only the faint echo of footsteps carried gently into the rain. Later that night, the shoemaker sat alone, the tools untouched, the bench still. But something in the silence felt warmer, not lighter, not louder, just fuller, as if the room itself had been mended in some invisible way. The years turned like pages in an old book. The fog came earlier, the mornings colder and still. The shoemaker rose before the sun, lit no lantern, and worked in silence. The shop grew older with him, the step cracked, the window clouded, the bell above the door remained quiet, though now it almost seemed respectful. Fewer people came, not because they forgot, but because the work had already touched them. Shoes that had once been mended were now passed on, from parent to child, from one quiet soul to another, each pair carrying a softness in the soul, a rhythm of care stitched into the seams. One morning, the child with the broken boot returned, now grown, her eyes steady, her walk certain. She entered the shop. The door creaked. The smell was the same, but the bench was empty. No tools, no thread, no shoemaker. Only a single pair of sandals on the workbench, worn, repaired many times, placed as if in farewell. She sat, waited, listened, then whispered, "Still here." And in that silence, a breeze moved through the room, software cool, the bell above the door, silent for years, gave one small chime, just one. But it was enough. She smiled and stepped out into the morning, shoes soft beneath her, heart quieter than it had been in years. And somewhere, beneath the waking sky, the rhythm of the shoemaker's hands carried on, not in sound, not in sight, but in the quiet steps of those who had once been mended.
And now, for the next story.
The quiet tea house. Nestled deep within a misty valley, where soft clouds drift lazily among rolling hills carpeted with emerald moss and wildflowers, there stands a tea house unlike any other. It is small and unassuming, its wooden beams weathered and worn smooth by the gentle hands of time, its paper windows glowing faintly with the warm light of countless quiet evenings spent in thoughtful stillness. Here the world slows its hurried breath, and every moment becomes a gentle invitation to pause, to breathe deeply and to taste the subtle sweetness of true stillness. The tea house rests quietly beside a slow, winding river whose waters move like liquid glass over smooth stones, mirroring the delicate dance of cherry blossoms drifting lazily on its surface. Each dawn, the mist rises like a silken curtain, wrapping the valley in a soft hush that seems to hold the whispered secrets of the earth itself. The faint, earthy scent of damp soil mingles with the sweet fragrance of blooming jasmine and the fresh green of spring leaves, filling the air with a quiet invitation to surrender to the present. One spring morning, as the world stirred gently awake beneath a pale sky brushed with strokes of rose and gold, a traveller named May found herself walking softly along the moss-covered path that led to this sanctuary. Her footsteps were light, careful not to disturb the tender stillness that embraced the land. She was drawn here not by fame or fortune, but by a quiet yearning, a desire to find a place untouched by haste, where the simple act of drinking tea might become a meditation, a sacred art of being fully present in the moment. As May crossed the threshold and stepped inside, a warm, inviting scent of roasted tea leaves and freshly steamed water wrapped around her like a comforting shawl. The room was simple and serene, tatami mats woven finely beneath her feet, a low wooden table polished to a soft sheen by the hands of generations, and shelves lined with delicate porcelain cups and teapots shaped by artisans who understood the delicate harmony of form, function, and beauty. She settled herself quietly onto the mat, the soft rustle of her kimono blending harmoniously with the gentle crackle of the hearth's fire. Across from her, the tea master, a graceful elderly woman whose eyes reflected the calm stillness of a mountain lake, moved with a slow, deliberate grace. Each movement was a quiet poem of mindfulness, the gentle clink of the kettle as it was lifted, the precise pouring of steaming water over fragrant leaves, the curl of rising steam like a silent prayer dissolving into the still air. May watched, captivated as the ritual unfolded. She felt her breath lengthen and deepen, her mind softening like the petals of a flower opening to the morning sun. When the tea master finally placed the small cup before her, warm and fragrant in her hands, May lifted it slowly to her lips. The flavour was subtle and profound, a delicate bitterness softened by a whisper of sweetness, unfolding slowly, like a secret whispered only to those who truly listen. As May sipped, the world outside the tea house faded into a distant hum, a soft backdrop to the deepening silence within. The worries and restless thoughts that had clung to her like shadows began to dissolve, slipping away like petals carried gently downstream. Time stretched and softened, each moment flowing seamlessly into the next, a continuous thread of calm, clarity, and gentle presence. The tea master's voice broke the silence at last, soft and tender like a breeze through bamboo leaves. In tea, there is stillness. In stillness, there is truth. And in truth, the heart finds its way home. May closed her eyes and breathed deeply, letting the warmth of the tea seep deep into her being, mingling with the slow rhythm of her breath. She felt the pulse of the earth beneath the tea house, the steady heartbeat of soil, water and stone, and the slow, timeless flow of the river nearby. She felt the soft weight of time's passing, neither hurried nor stagnant, but a gentle unfolding, like a flower blooming in the sun. As the afternoon light softened and the sky blushed with the first hues of twilight, May remained seated in quiet contemplation, carrying the tea's tender wisdom as a flame nestled softly in her heart. Outside, the river's gentle murmur mingled with the distant song of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the evening breeze, weaving a lullaby of peace that reached deep into the soul. She wondered softly, what moments of stillness can you find in your own day? Where can your heart come home to peace? The tea house waited quietly for her answer, a gentle presence beyond words, a sanctuary held safe within the flow of time and breath.
And now, for the next story.
In a distant mountain village where mists floated like silk scarves, there lived a tea master. He was old, very old. His fingers were thin as reeds, his eyes like quiet ponds, and his tea house, small and low, sat among flowering plum trees that blossomed even in the snow. Each morning, before the sun rose, he lit a single candle and prepared a tray with 3 cups. 2 were for guests. The third always sat untouched. No one ever drank from it. No tea was poured into it. No lips had ever met its rim. And yet, the master set it out every single day. When asked why, he would only smile and say, "It is not ready," or sometimes, "The right guest has not yet arrived." Some villagers thought it strange, others called it poetic, but most simply forgot about the cup. All except one, a traveller, young, restless, with a pack full of questions, wandered into the village on the trail of something he couldn't name. He had heard of the master. He came seeking wisdom, clarity, answers. And on the 3rd morning he was invited into the tea house. The tea was fragrant, the silence warm, but his eyes kept drifting to the 3rd cup, empty, unblemished, waiting, and something about it unsettled him. He wanted to know more, much more. The next day the traveller returned. He bowed, removed his shoes, sat quietly on the straw mat. Again the master poured tea into 2 cups and placed the 3rd, as always, between them. The traveller waited. Perhaps today, he thought, perhaps today I will see it used. But no tea was poured into the 3rd. No gesture, no explanation, just silence and steam. The traveller sipped his tea. It was perfect. Still, he couldn't stop staring at the untouched cup. On the 4th visit, he finally asked, "Why do you prepare a cup you never use?" The master looked at him, eyes gentle, then replied, "Some things are not meant to be filled." The traveller frowned. "But a cup is made to hold tea. Isn't that its purpose?" The master smiled. "And yet, isn't it the empty space inside the cup that makes it useful?" The traveller fell silent. He thought of all the things in his life he had rushed to fill. His schedule, his journal, his conversations, always pouring in more, rarely listening to the space between. He visited the tea house many times after that. Each time, the cup remained, still, untouched, radiating a presence he couldn't explain. And little by little, he stopped asking about it. He just sat. And over time, the silence felt less like absence and more like invitation. Seasons turned. The traveller left the village, not suddenly, but with a soft farewell like the final note of a song. He carried no scrolls, no answers, only the memory of quiet tea and a cup that never held a drop. He journeyed far, to noisy cities, to desert temples, to crowded markets and empty hills. He learned many things, saw much of the world. But sometimes, in the hush between conversations, his mind would drift to the old tea house, to the scent of steam, to the silence wrapped in warm ceramic. Years passed, his hair greyed, his pace slowed, and one spring morning his path turned once again toward the mountain village. It hadn't changed much. The plum trees still bloomed, the air still held the scent of wood smoke and petals. He found the tea house, still standing, still quiet, and the master, gone. But inside, a younger monk greeted him, offered him tea. 3 cups were set, 2 were poured, the third untouched, exactly as before. The traveller blinked. His hand trembled slightly as he reached toward the 3rd cup, but stopped just shy of touching it. Instead, he smiled, deeply, softly, and whispered, "Thank you for waiting." The monk said nothing, only bowed, and in that silence the traveller understood. The cup had never been about tea. It had always been about presence, about a space held open patiently for something beyond words. The traveller stayed in the village. At first, just for the night, then for the season, then for good. He tended the tea house, swept its floors, trimmed the garden, welcomed guests, and each morning before the sun climbed the sky, he lit a candle, boiled the water, and set out 3 cups, 2 for those who came, and 1, as before, untouched. Some visitors asked about it, most did not, but those who stayed in silence understood more than words could offer. The traveller, now older than the master had ever been, spoke less, smiled more. He poured tea with slow grace, never hurried, never distracted, and always that 3rd cup sat in its place, a gentle reminder that not all things must be filled, that some vessels are sacred precisely because they wait. Sometimes he would sit alone, no guests, no sound but the kettle's hum, and still he would set the 3rd cup, not out of habit, but as a gesture to presence, to stillness, to the mystery that drinks without drinking. One morning a child arrived, wide-eyed, barefoot, quiet. He stared at the empty cup for a long time, then looked up and asked, "Whose cup is that?" The old man smiled. "It belongs to everyone who hasn't arrived yet." The child nodded, though he didn't understand. Not yet. But he stayed, watched, learned. And one day, when the old man was gone, he lit a candle, boiled the water, and set out 3 cups.
And now, for the next story.
There was a man who never slept beneath a roof. Each evening, as the village prepared for rest, he would carry a small mat, a folded blanket, and a weathered lantern to the edge of the garden behind the old tea house. He would lay his mat carefully on the cool ground, just beyond the shadow of the last cypress tree, where the moss was soft and the sky opened wide. When asked why he slept outside, even in the cool of autumn, even when the mist curled low over the grass, he would smile gently and say only this: "The moon dreams better when someone is listening." The villagers had long since stopped asking questions. Children whispered stories about him. Some said he was a monk who'd forgotten his temple. Others believed he could hear the moon speak, but the man never explained. He simply unrolled his mat each night, lit his lantern with a single breath, and lay beneath the open sky as though it were the ceiling of a quiet temple. The moon would rise, sometimes full and golden, sometimes thin as a whisper, and the man would watch until his eyes closed on their own, not with force, not with effort, but like a leaf giving in to the river. Each night, a small surrender. Each night, a gentle return to stillness. One night, in the middle of the 7th month, a wind arrived earlier than usual. It came not with force, but with intention, cool, steady, like a long exhale from the mountain. The man lit his lantern as always, but the flame danced differently. It leaned, it flickered, it bowed, as though it too were listening. He didn't mind. He placed the lantern beside him and laid back on the mat, his hands resting softly on his chest, his breath slow and without rhythm. The wind moved through the garden like a careful hand through tall grass. The trees didn't rustle, they breathed. Above him, the moon emerged slowly from behind a bank of soft clouds, round, quiet, and impossibly clear. He did not stare at it. He let it be, just as he let the night be, and the wind, and the distant sounds of frogs calling across the stream. There was no need to reach for peace. It had already arrived. Moments passed, or perhaps hours. Time had folded in on itself like cloth in a drawer. And then, just as he began to drift, he heard something. Not a word, not a sound, but a kind of presence. A hush with weight to it. He opened his eyes to find the moon staring back, not above, but beside him, low, near, so close he could see its edges blur in the lantern's glow. He smiled, closed his eyes again, and said softly, "I'm still here." The next morning, a young boy from the village came to the garden just as the dew was lifting from the stones. He often visited early, curious about the man who slept without walls. Today he stood quietly at the edge of the moss, watching the figure still lying there, eyes closed, but smiling. After a long silence, the boy finally asked, in a voice barely louder than a breath, "Do you ever get lonely out here by yourself?" The man didn't open his eyes, but he replied, softly, slowly, like a thought unfolding, "Only when I forget I'm not alone." The boy looked around. There was no one else, just trees and stone, and a sky so open it seemed to listen. "But there's no one here," the boy said, "only you and the moon." The man finally opened his eyes. They were not sharp nor distant. They looked as though they had just come in from the wind. "The moon is enough," he said, "and sometimes even that is more company than I need." The boy didn't understand. Not fully, but something about the way the man said it made the question feel less important, like a pebble that no longer needed to be carried. He sat beside the man for a little while longer, watching the breeze move through the tall grass, listening to the silence between birdsong. And for the first time, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt full. The man continued to sleep in the garden, through spring winds, through autumn rains, through the hush of falling snow. He added no roof, no walls, only a second blanket and a deeper breath. Some nights the moon was hidden, veiled in cloud, gone from sight. But he never waited for it. He lay back just the same, as if the sky were always full even when it appeared empty. The villagers began to call him the listener, not because he spoke little, but because the space around him always felt quieter after he left it. Over time, others began to join him, not to talk, not to ask, but simply to lie down beside the silence and let it settle over them. A teacher came, then a traveller, then a mother with her child. No words were exchanged. Only breath, only stillness. Only the gentle knowing that not all sleep is for rest, and not all silence is empty. One night, many years after the boy's first question, he returned, now older, carrying a mat of his own. He lay beside the old man, who now had more wrinkles than the bark of the tree behind him. As the moon rose, full and silver and still, the man whispered, "Do you hear it?" The boy, now grown, listened closely. There was no sound, no voice, only the rustling of the leaves and the sound of his own breath softening. And he nodded. "Yes," he said, "it's saying nothing." The old man smiled, closed his eyes and whispered, "Exactly." And that night, the moon slept too.
And now, for the next story.
At the edge of the old mountain temple, just before the path turned to stone, there sat a single ceramic bowl. It was small, unadorned, plain in a way that made it difficult to look away. Each morning, a young monk would rise with the sun, walk barefoot to the outer gate, and place the bowl carefully on a flat stone. Then he would bow once, not deeply, but with quiet attention, and walk back inside without a word. The bowl remained there all day, and all night, always empty. It was never guarded, never explained, and yet it was never touched. Travelers saw it, villagers passed by it, birds sometimes perched on its rim, but no one dared move it, no one filled it, no one turned it over to see what lay beneath, because somehow that emptiness felt sacred, as if something unseen rested within it, something not meant to be disturbed. Years passed, seasons changed, the bowl stayed, rain collected in it, dried, snow fell in it, melted, leaves curled inside, were blown away again. Still the monk returned, every morning without fail, placed it gently, bowed, and left. Until one morning, he didn't. The next morning, the bowl was still there, but the monk was not. No footsteps on the path, no soft breath in the air, no motion by the gate, just silence, and the bowl. A traveller came that day, dust on her robe, wind in her sleeves, and a look in her eyes that said she had been searching for something not found in maps. She saw the bowl, paused, waited, then sat beside it. She didn't touch it. She didn't speak. She simply breathed with it, slow, even, present. Hours passed. The wind shifted. The sun moved like a lantern across the sky. Still she sat, and as dusk began to gather its light, she reached into her satchel and removed nothing, just her hand, empty, open, steady. She held it above the bowl as though about to give something. Then she let it hover there, still, unmoving, and then withdrew it. Gently, she placed both hands on her knees, bowed to the bowl, and stood. No words, no offering, no explanation, but something had changed. Not in the bowl, not in the air, but in the silence between. When the stars rose, they seemed to linger longer above the temple gate. When the moon crested the trees, its light curled itself into the curve of the bowl, as if drawn there on purpose. And from the shadows an old monk watched. Not the young one, someone older, softer. He smiled and said to no one, "At last, someone has understood." The next morning, someone left a stone, not a precious one, just smooth, worn, warmed slightly by the sun. They placed it gently in the bowl and bowed, not deeply, but with care. The day after, a child left a single feather, white, software barely moving in the breeze. Then came a folded poem, a pressed flower, a coin rubbed thin from years of touch. The bowl remained mostly empty, but now and then something would appear. Never too much, never at once. Only what felt right to leave and light enough to carry in. No one spoke of it. No sign was posted. No rule was given. But word began to spread, not through mouths but through motion, through presence. The bowl had become something more than a vessel. It had become a mirror. People came, not to take, but to notice. Not to give out of duty, but to share out of stillness. They left behind what they no longer needed, what weighed them down, what reminded them they were still carrying stories that had already ended, and in return, they left lighter, not happier, not louder, but quieter inside. As if they'd set something down and walked away with a little more space to breathe. Still, no one guarded the bowl. No one claimed it. It was never full, it was never empty. It simply was. One night, under a sky without stars, an elderly man approached the temple gate. His steps were slow, measured, as though each footfall was remembering something. He carried nothing, no bag, no gift, not even a walking stick, only his breath and the weight of a life lived long and wide. He stopped before the bowl, looked at it for a while, then sat down beside it and closed his eyes. He didn't move. He didn't speak. Hours passed. The night deepened, the wind cooled, but still, he sat. At dawn, when the first bird called and the temple bell hummed its low morning tone, he opened his eyes and reached inside the bowl, not to place something in, but to feel what was already there. He touched the feather, the coin, the poem, the silence. Then he bowed, deeply, fully, like a tree leaning into winter. And with that, he whispered something into the bowl, so soft the wind itself leaned in to listen. No one heard the words, not even the birds, but something in the air shifted. The bowl was still empty, and yet it held everything. The sorrows that had been laid down, the joys left behind, the quiet intentions wrapped in petals and stone. That day the monks moved the bowl slightly inward, on to the first step of the temple path, not to hide it, but to honor it. A new bowl was placed at the gate, smaller, simpler, waiting, and the first to see it was not a monk, nor a traveller, but the wind. It paused there just long enough to rustle the rim, as if to say, this too shall be filled by the beauty of what cannot be held.
And now for the next story.
At the edge of the village, past the last row of plum trees, there was a small clearing where nothing much ever happened. The grass grew in quiet waves. The earth held few stones. Even the birds seemed to pass it by without singing. And then one spring, a man arrived with wood. He brought no cart, no tools, only a bundle of planks strapped to his back, and a look in his eyes that spoke of something not yet seen. He did not ask permission. He did not announce his purpose. He simply began building a bridge. But here's the thing, there was no river, no stream, no cliff, no gap to cross, just grass. He laid the planks with great care, tapping them into place with a smooth stone. Each day the bridge grew longer. Each night he sat quietly beside it, watching the sky change colours without ever looking away. By the seventh day, a small group had gathered from the village. Some watched in silence. Some laughed. Others began to whisper. "He's gone mad," one said. "There's nothing to cross here." "Maybe he's waiting for a river to come," another joked. But the man kept building, plank after plank, with slow, steady hands, until finally the bridge stood complete, 12 paces long, raised slightly above the grass, leading nowhere. And then he stopped, for days. No one crossed the bridge. Why would they? It began in grass and ended in grass. No road, no destination, just a quiet arc of wood in a place that had never needed one. Children came to play near it, but were warned not to climb. Elders walked past it slowly, squinting as though a purpose might reveal itself if stared at long enough. One morning, a monk from the hill temple arrived. He stood at one end of the bridge, hands folded behind his back, and said, "You've built something quite unusual." The man nodded. "Do you plan to move it somewhere?" "No," the builder replied. "It belongs here." The monk smiled politely, waiting for more. When no explanation came, he asked again, "But what is it for?" The builder looked at the bridge, then at the grass, then at the monk. "To cross," he said. "But to cross to where?" The builder paused, then answered, "That depends on who you are when you step on, and who you are when you step off." The monk didn't reply. He stood still for a long while, then bowed and walked away without ever placing a foot on the wood. That night, the man lit a single lantern at the base of the bridge and sat beside it as he always did. He did not guard it, he did not wait. He simply sat. As the wind moved gently through the tall grass and the moon rose like a question, no longer needing an answer. It happened quietly, as most true things do. An old woman came just after sunrise, carrying a small bundle of herbs wrapped in cloth. She did not speak. She did not hesitate. She stepped onto the bridge as though she'd always known it was there. The wood creaked gently under her feet. The breeze moved with her. And though she crossed in no more than 12 paces, something shifted. She stood at the other end for a long time, then sat down in the grass, facing back toward the bridge, as though looking at something she'd just left behind. That afternoon, a boy came running, barefoot, breathless. He stopped at the foot of the bridge, looked around, and crossed with a single joyful leap. When he reached the far side, he didn't run again. He walked, slower, lighter, as though something had been left behind that didn't need to be carried anymore. And so it began, one by one, a traveller, a widow, a farmer with his hat in his hands. They crossed the bridge not to go somewhere new, but to meet something already waiting. No toll, no signs, no words, just the sound of footsteps on warm wood and the silence that followed each one. And the builder, he remained where he always was, at the edge, beside the lantern, watching without asking, listening without speaking, smiling sometimes, but only when the wind moved just right through the grain of the wood. Seasons passed, the grass grew tall, then yellowed, then bowed beneath the snow. And still, the bridge remained. It aged without aging. It creaked but did not crack. It stood but did not shift. People still came, not every day, but often enough that the wood grew smooth under the quiet rhythm of footsteps. Sometimes they crossed alone, sometimes in pairs, sometimes in silence. They met eyes with others midway across and nodded as if passing through a shared dream. The villagers no longer questioned its purpose. Children no longer laughed. Even the birds began to pause on its railings, resting their wings before continuing their invisible paths. And the builder, one day, he was simply gone. No goodbye, no note, just the empty lantern at the bridge's foot and the faint scent of pine smoke in the air. Some said he had gone to find a river worthy of his next bridge. Others believed he had walked across his own creation and never returned. But the bridge, it stayed. Through wind, through frost, through everything, and those who crossed it never forgot the feeling, though few could name it. Not peace, not healing, not understanding. Something quieter than all of that, like the weight of a question that no longer needs answering. And so it was, that a bridge which led nowhere began to take the people exactly where they needed to go. In a small, ancient village nestled between gentle, rolling hills that seemed to cradle the sky itself, there was a garden unlike any other, a secret held softly between the roots of old cedar trees and the quiet whisper of jasmine flowers. The garden's gate was carved from weathered cedar, its wood smooth and worn by decades of wind, rain, and the touch of countless hands. It stood slightly ajar, inviting the curious and the weary alike into a world that seemed to exist just beyond the ordinary flow of time. An old gardener named Aiko lived beside this garden, her house a simple wooden cottage framed by creeping ivy and moss that glistened with morning dew. Each day before dawn had fully stretched her rosy fingers across the sky, Aiko rose and stepped into the garden. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as though she was walking a sacred path rather than merely tending plants. Her hands, gentle and knowing, brushed lightly over fern fronds unfurling like ancient scrolls, moss soft as velvet, and petals that nodded as if they held secrets spoken only in the language of the wind. The garden was a mosaic of greens, soft blues, and pale pinks, a living poem of earth and air. It was a place where the noisy bustle of the world outside fell away, replaced by the gentle music of dripping dew, rustling leaves, and the distant soft call of birds awakening to the day. Aiko believed the garden was more than just a collection of plants. It was a sanctuary, a quiet sanctuary where the restless heart could find rest and the noisy mind could find silence. It was a place to slow down, to listen not only to nature's songs but to the silence between those songs, the quiet spaces where true understanding blooms. One misty morning, just as the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the leaves like golden threads, a young man came to the garden's gate. His shoulders were heavy with the burdens of many restless thoughts and sleepless nights. The tension in his face softened the moment he stepped through the gate, as if the garden itself exhaled a welcome that seeped deep into his bones. Aiko met him with a gentle smile, her eyes bright with quiet kindness. She motioned for him to walk slowly with her among the plants, to feel the earth beneath their feet and the coolness of the morning air against their skin. "Why does this garden feel so still?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, touched with wonder. Aiko led him down a narrow stone path to the heart of the garden, where a small pond lay nestled like a secret. Its surface was smooth and glassy, reflecting the sky and the branches of the whispering trees overhead. Tiny ripples flickered across the water, stirred by a soft breeze that carried the scent of jasmine and damp earth. "The garden listens," she said softly, kneeling beside the pond, "not with ears, but with presence. It does not hurry or rush. It simply is." The young man crouched beside her, gazing into the clear water. He saw his own reflection shimmer and change with every ripple, a delicate dance between stillness and movement. "Is that why I feel calmer here?" he asked, the tension in his voice easing as he spoke. "Yes," Aiko replied gently, "because here you are invited to be still, to breathe deeply, to watch without judgment, and to rest." They sat together by the pond, the world quiet except for the soft rustling of leaves and the faint drip of dew falling from the branches. The air was cool and fragrant, and the calm seemed to settle around them like a soft blanket. "The garden teaches us patience," Aiko said, her voice barely above the breeze. "It teaches us about holding space for growth, even when that growth is slow or unseen." The young man thought of his own mind, often racing ahead like a restless river, filled with worries and desires. Here, in the garden's quiet embrace, he felt a different rhythm, one of gentle unfolding and quiet waiting. "Can I learn to be like this garden?" he asked, looking up at her with hopeful eyes. Aiko smiled, the lines of her face softening in the morning light. "Every day is a chance to plant stillness," she said, "even in the smallest moments, like a seed resting quietly beneath the soil, waiting for the right time to grow." She reached out to touch a tender shoot just emerging from the earth, its tiny leaves unfolding slowly, hesitantly. "Growth is not always visible," she continued. "Sometimes it is happening deep below the surface, in places we cannot see. And sometimes it is simply the act of waiting, patient, unhurried, open to whatever may come." The young man breathed in the cool, fresh air again, feeling the softness of the moss beneath his hands and the subtle warmth of the sun beginning to rise. A quiet hope stirred in his chest, a seedling of peace growing stronger with each gentle moment. When the sun climbed higher and spilled golden light across the garden, warming the petals and leaves, the young man rose to leave. As he walked back through the gate, the garden seemed to breathe with him. Its quiet blessing carried softly on the breeze. And as he disappeared down the path toward the village, a question lingered in the air like a whispered invitation. What might grow in the quiet spaces you hold? Far beyond the familiar hum of the village, where the air thins and the world widens into quiet vastness, there lies a mountain path that twists and turns beneath towering ancient pines and moss-covered stones. Here the night moves slowly, draped in velvety darkness, where only the faintest glow dares to ripple through the shadows. On this path walks an old traveller named Koji. He carries a lantern, not bright, not brash, but small, steady, a gentle glow that breathes warmth into the cool night air. Its light is soft, trembling like a quiet heartbeat, casting long, wavering shadows that dance and mingle with the ancient trees. Koji's footsteps are deliberate, slow as the steady drip of water off a leaf. Each step seems to carry not just his body, but the weight and lightness of many years, of many journeys both outside and within. The scent of pine is thick and soothing, mixed with the damp earth and the faint, sweet hint of wildflowers sleeping beneath the dark. Somewhere nearby, a brook hums its age-old lullaby, tumbling over smooth stones polished by time. The night air tastes cool on Koji's tongue, sharp with the clarity of stars shining above like silent candles scattered across the black silk of the sky. At a gentle bend in the path where the trees open slightly to reveal a small clearing bathed in silver moonlight, Koji pauses. He lowers the lantern, resting it softly on a mossy stone, careful not to disturb the delicate peace around him. Sitting beside it, he closes his eyes and draws the night into his breath, the coolness of air flowing in, the warmth flowing out. In the quiet of this moment, memories rise slowly like mist. He remembers the words of his teacher, spoken long ago beneath a sky just like this one. The lantern's light does not banish the darkness. It only reveals the path for those who choose to walk it. The simplicity of these words is a kind of gentle mystery. The darkness is not an enemy to be defeated, but a companion to be understood. The light is not a weapon, but a guide, soft, humble, persistent. Opening his eyes, Koji gazes down the shadowed trail. The path curves away, disappearing between the thick trunks of ancient pines. The lantern's flame flickers quietly, trembling with the breeze that barely stirs the air. He wonders, is the path truly illuminated by this lantern? Or has the light always been inside the traveller's heart, waiting to be seen? With a slow breath, Koji stands and resumes his walk. The lantern swings gently at his side, its glow steady but modest. The forest breathes with him, the crunch of dry needles underfoot, the soft rustling of unseen creatures in the brush, the distant call of an owl, all become part of a gentle symphony. His own breath is a slow wave rising and falling, a reminder of life flowing steadily through stillness. Halfway along the path, Koji notices a young woman seated on a fallen log, her eyes closed in calm repose. Her face holds a serene quiet that draws him near. She opens her eyes when he approaches, their deep brown depths reflecting the lantern's glow. "Why do you carry the lantern?" she asks softly. "To find my way," Koji answers. "But the path is dark," she says, "and the light seems so small." Koji smiles with the warmth of understanding. "It is enough." She looks at him thoughtfully, as if weighing the truth of this simple statement. "Sometimes," Koji continues, "the smallest light holds the deepest truth." They sit together in silence, the forest cradling them in its tender embrace. As moments stretch, the woman's expression changes, softening, opening. When she rises to continue, Koji notices a new light in her eyes, a quiet glow that seems to come not from the lantern, but from within. Together they walk the last stretch toward the mountain's peak, where the sky widens like a great ocean overhead. Stars spill across the night in endless constellations, their silver shimmer washing over rocks and trees, bathing the world in ancient light. Koji places the lantern down and stands quietly, feeling the vast stillness settle deep inside him. In this great silence, he understands. The path was never truly dark. The light was never truly small. The path waits for the traveller's steps. The light waits in the traveller's heart. The lantern's glow becomes a question, flickering gently in the night. When the world fades to shadow, where does your light come from? When all else is silent, what guides your way? The mountain holds no answers, only space. Space to rest, to wonder, to simply be. And in this space, the traveller finds a calm deeper than words, a knowing quieter than thought. So, when you feel lost in the dark, remember the mountain path. Remember the gentle glow that need not banish night, only reveal the next step. And listen for the light within you, always waiting to be seen. High above the rolling valleys and whispering forests, where the air thins and breath comes soft and slow, there lies a solitary hermitage carved gently into the granite face of an ancient mountain. The hermit who dwells there has lived a life wrapped in silence, a silence so profound that he is said to have spoken only once in 50 years. His quiet presence is a language beyond words, a deep and steady current of calm that flows beneath the surface of everything. The path leading to the hermitage winds like a silver thread through groves of ancient pine trees, whose needles glisten softly in the filtered light, murmuring secrets to the breeze. It climbs steeply over weathered stones, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. Each step a slow meditation as the traveller ascends further away from the noisy world below. On one still morning, just as dawn was melting into pale gold and pink across the sky, a traveller named Kai began his journey up this path. His heart was a tangle of restless thoughts and unanswered questions, a mind weary from chasing meaning in the loud clamour of life. With deliberate steps, he moved slowly forward, breathing deeply the crisp, fragrant air. Each inhale filled with the scent of pine and fresh earth, each exhale releasing a little more of the tension he carried. As Kai climbed higher, the familiar world grew distant and small beneath him. The chatter of towns, the rush of rivers, the distant calls of birds faded into a muted silence that felt like a soft cloak wrapped around his shoulders. The mountain itself seemed to pause, holding its breath in reverence for what lay ahead. Finally, Kai reached a narrow ledge where the hermitage sat quietly, a simple wooden cabin nestled against the granite cliff, its weathered beams touched by lichen and moss. Outside, on a smooth stone bench carved from the mountain itself, the hermit sat with eyes closed, his face serene and still as a deep, undisturbed lake. Kai approached without a word, settling down gently on a nearby rock, feeling the cool stone beneath him and the steady rhythm of the earth. Between them stretched a silence, not empty but full, thick with presence and calm. It was the kind of silence that speaks without speaking, that holds space without needing to fill it. Time unfolded slowly there, a seamless flow without beginning or end. The pine needles whispered softly overhead, a gentle rustle like the breath of the mountain itself. The sun shifted across the sky, casting long shadows that danced quietly on the rocks. Kai felt his own breath slow, deepening into a peaceful rhythm that matched the steady pulse of the earth beneath him. As the hours drifted by, Kai's restless thoughts began to untangle, loosen and dissolve like morning mist warmed by sunlight. The questions he had carried so tightly faded into a gentle curiosity, an openness to whatever might come in the stillness. In the late afternoon, as the sky softened into hues of lavender and rose, the hermit's eyes slowly opened. He looked at Kai with a gaze both tender and profound, a quiet invitation woven into the very silence between them. Then, with a voice soft and deliberate, the hermit spoke a single word that seemed to echo through the still air. Listen. Kai nodded, understanding in that moment that the deepest wisdom is not found in words spoken aloud, but in the silence that surrounds them, the space where the soul can rest, where the heart can hear its own quiet truth. He rose slowly, the weight of the mountain's calm settling into his bones like a gentle song. As he began his descent, the hermit's silent teaching followed him. A whisper carried on the wind, a reminder that sometimes the greatest voice is found in stillness, and peace is waiting in the quiet places we often overlook. The path stretched before him, shaded by towering pines that swayed softly with the breeze, their needles sparkling like emerald stars in the fading light. The air was cool and sweet, filled with the faint scent of cedar and moss, and the distant call of a solitary bird echoed gently through the valley. With each step down the mountain, Kai felt the hermit's presence within, a calm shadow, a silent friend. The questions that once crowded his mind now rested peacefully, held in the gentle embrace of stillness. And so, beneath the vast, endless sky and among the ancient trees, Kai carried the hermit's gift quietly in his heart. A soft, lingering question stirred there, like a leaf floating on a slow stream. What might you hear if you simply listen to the silence within and to the world breathing softly around you? In a forgotten valley nestled between folded hills and whispering ridges, where clouds often touched the earth and stayed for tea, there stood a humble temple. No grand gate, no golden spires, only a low roof cradled by moss, and wooden walls warmed by years of morning sun and gentle rain. This was the Temple of Silent Pines, where the wind moved slow, as if it too had something to learn. At the heart of the temple courtyard, hanging beneath an arched beam of blackened cedar, was a bell. Not just any bell, this one was ancient, perhaps older than the trees around it. Its surface bore the faded etchings of lotus petals and nameless symbols, worn soft by 1,000 seasons of wind and hands. Each morning before the sun rose fully over the ridge, a young monk named Tenzin would step quietly across the dew-dark stones, his robes brushing the air like a whisper, and strike the bell once. Only once. The sound would rise, slowly at first, like breath gathering, and then bloom, golden and round, spreading into the still air like ripples through a bowl of water, left undisturbed overnight. And in that single note, the valley listened. Birds paused mid-song. Leaves stilled. Even the river, which ran not far from the temple's edge, seemed to hush its burble. The villagers in nearby hamlets often paused whatever they were doing, chopping wood, pouring tea, tying bundles of herbs, and turned their ears slightly, not quite knowing why. Tenzin too would listen. He would lower the wooden striker with reverence, return it to its resting place beside the bell, and remain there, motionless. His eyes would close, his chest would soften, and he would wait, not for the sound, but for what came after it. You see, many months ago, on his first winter in the temple, Master Gendo had told him, "The bell's sound is not what you hear, Tenzin. It is what remains after the hearing ends." At the time, the young monk had bowed deeply and whispered, "Yes, Master," as all students do when the lesson is too large to carry all at once. But he did not yet understand. And so each day he struck the bell, and each day he listened, not just with his ears, but with his body, with his breath, with his wondering. And yet, understanding did not come. Weeks became months. The trees turned their colors and let them go. The temple fox disappeared for a while and returned with thinner fur. Rain soaked the stone paths into mirrors, and the scent of wood smoke filled the halls. Still, the bell rang. Still, Tenzin listened, and still the silence after felt just empty. Not full, as Master Gendo had hinted. Not wholly. Until one morning, it was late spring, a fog lay heavy in the valley, so thick that the temple's outer garden vanished into pale nothingness. The stones beneath Tenzin's feet were slick with mist, and his breath left no trace in the chilled air. He bowed to the bell, raised the striker, and let it fall, gently, with the weight of surrender. But the sound did not rise as before. It seemed to vanish before it fully formed, swallowed by the fog, absorbed by the quiet. No echo, no lingering hum, just absence. Tenzin stood longer than usual, confusion softening into stillness. A different kind of listening began to grow in him, one that had nothing to do with ears. And then something in him moved. Not a thought, not an idea, just a quiet tug behind the heart. He turned and walked, past the moss garden, past the stone lantern smudged with lichen, down a path he rarely took, the one that curved behind the temple into a part of the forest where the light changed direction and time seemed to thin. He walked without aim, no sandals, no staff, just silence at his back, and that same quiet question curled gently in his chest. Hours may have passed, or none at all. Eventually the path dissolved into a grove of slender birch trees, and there, half hidden among ferns and moss, was a pond, small, oval, still as breath held in wonder. No frogs, no wind, no falling leaves, just the water holding the sky like a memory. Tenzin sat on a smooth rock beside it, and for the first time in many moons he did not try to understand. He simply was. Birdsong returned in the far distance. A drop of water fell from a leaf overhead and disappeared into the pond without a sound. And in that moment, somewhere between presence and forgetting, he felt it, the bell, still ringing, not in the air, not in his ears, but in the spaciousness inside him. It had never stopped. It had only become quieter than sound, wide as sky, deep as sleep. The silence that remained was not empty. It was listening, and Tenzin, he was not listening to it. He was part of it. He breathed out slowly, the exhale longer than the inhale, and felt something loosen inside. Some old knot of striving or searching, untied by stillness itself. When he returned to the temple, Master Gendo was sweeping the courtyard with a straw broom, his movements slow and even. He did not look up, but after a moment he spoke. "You heard it?" And Tenzin nodded, though no words rose. From that day on he struck the bell the same way. Once, gently, but his listening had changed. He no longer waited for the sound to end, he waited for the silence to arrive, and within it he found not answers but presence, not knowledge but knowing. And so, if ever you find yourself in a quiet valley on a mist-wrapped morning, and you hear a bell that seems not to ring but to ripple through your bones, pause and listen, not just with your ears, but with the space between your thoughts. You may find yourself not hearing, but being heard. And you may wonder, gently, what have I been missing beneath all the noise?
The story has ended, but the stillness it carried remains. You may not remember every image, every whisper, every turn in the path, and that's perfectly okay. Zen stories are not meant to be memorized. They are meant to be felt, to echo softly through the quiet halls of your being. Maybe you drifted away halfway through. Maybe you stayed with every word. Either way, you've arrived, here, now, in this place where thought thins and the body begins to dissolve into calm. Let yourself stay just a little longer. Feel the silence wrap around you like a warm blanket. Notice the rhythm of your breath, slow, steady, effortless. There's nothing left to chase, nothing to fix, nowhere to be. Only this moment, this peace, this soft ending that isn't really an end at all, because the real journey, the one inward, continues. Even as the story fades, something lingers, a sense of space, a quiet understanding, a thread of light woven gently through the dark. So stay if you wish, sleep if you're ready, and if your eyes are still open, know that you can return here anytime. This story, this stillness, this space belongs to you. Thank you for sharing your presence tonight, From all of us here at Zen Mind Journey, may your sleep be deep, your dreams kind, and your waking gentle. We'll be here again when the world grows loud and your spirit needs silence. Good night.